The Corolla Civic Association has represented the interests of property and business owners on the Currituck Outer Banks for more than a decade. The North Carolina Travel and Tourism Coalition has represented the state's tourism industry for 30 years. The coalition convinced the legislature that imposing an occupancy tax actually hurts the tourism industry unless the proceeds are invested to make the area more attractive to tourists. It is the view of CCA and the coalition that the county's use of occupancy tax for general government services has been in violation of both the letter and the intent of the law. When the tax rate was raised, the allowed purposes were changed to conform to the uniform guidelines. The new law expressly excludes previous authorization to use for tourist-related general government services. The old law gave wide latitude in use of general funds for other uses, but the new law removed this option. But the county doesn't see it that way.
Is what is a tourism-related expenditure? Well, it's something in the discretion of this body. If it's the Board of Commissioners' decision that whether it is tourism-related, it's at your discretion to determine, and it is to be used for lodging, meeting, recreational, and convention. And it actually has a piece now that was added several years ago, and we can do beach nourishment. So it isn't exclusively or solely tourism. It does have other pieces to it.
And in the old law, they line item stuff out. And I have this for you a little bit neater, but they lined out things like tourism-related purposes, construction, maintenance, public facilities, buildings, garbage, and so forth. And they keep going. And so the new stuff is tourism-related expenditures, including beach nourishment, which they added in. Basically, as we've talked about this before, and as the county manager has brought out, we have a pretty wide latitude. And I think the important thing people are missing is when they struck through this stuff, they didn't say you couldn't do it anymore. They just cleaned it up and made it 2 sentences and then defined that as to how we can use it. There's several other expenditures that were not in here. We spend money on the police department, fire department. People want to come on vacation where they know they're safe. They want to know when they call and pick up the phone, somebody's going to be there to answer it. We certainly would not need the fire department we have or the police department we had if it was just another town like it is over here. So those monies need to come out of tourism dollars. They're there specifically to fulfill the needs of the tourists and the increase in volume of people that are there.
The coalition strongly disagrees with this rationale as a reasonable judgment in the use of occupancy tax. Our third objection is abuse of discretion. After examining all of the discovery documents, reading all of the board meeting minutes, and listening to 6 years of board meeting videos, no evidence was found that the board considered the TRE requirements of how these services were designed to increase the use of lodging by attracting tourists and business travelers. Emails and audit reports show that the county manager based his budget on the full year costs of service for Corolla. These records show that for more than a decade, the county manager proposed OT budgets for sheriff and EMS that he knew covered the full year costs in Corolla. But the county managers told the board that these were actually just seasonal costs.
We transfer over $1 million from the occupancy tax in the general fund to support additional law enforcement that's hired for the summer season. We also transfer another additional $1 million for additional ambulance units that are needed for the influx of population. We do augment some of the services that we provide have to be ramped up for the summer season. We bring on additional EMS crews and EMS units. We have additional law enforcement that comes in for the summer. It is to provide additional coverage of emergency medical services, additional ambulance and personnel that's required with the influx of the summer traffic of population. The Sheriff's Department also increases and upstaffs for the season. Occupancy tax pays for the additional cost associated with putting additional EMS units in the Outer Banks to account for the influx of tourism population that we experience. So it's the additional cost of EMS services. At the same time, additional law enforcement is deployed onto the Outer Banks to account for the the influx of that population. So 1.2 million of Oxy tax goes to reimburse or to cover that cost.
I want to make sure that folks understand these are not EMS services year round. These are specific times that we have increased demand because of the tourism in our community. It's the same with the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office ramps up activity on the Outer Banks as the traffic and the tourists increase our population. You'll see the big spend there is for the extra EMS staff that is housed in the beach. That's to help facilitate the uptick in population we have. Same with the sheriff's office.
Under oath, the finance director confirmed that the budgets proposed and approved without question were actually full-year costs. For more than a decade, as 17 commissioners came and went on the board, Scanlon's argument was persuasive. Full-year costs were approved without question. No one asked how this attracted tourists. No one asked to see the data on actual tourist demand for public safety services. General government services are not tourist attractions. Public safety service demand in the tourist areas is significantly less than that in residential areas by any objective measurement. This statement is based on analysis of 2 years of sheriff and EMS call data records, over 150,000 calls over this period. Here is an overview of the results. Even at the peak of the summer season, when there are twice as many tourists at the beach than there are residents in the rest of the county, the beach has less than half the sheriff and EMS calls. The data shows less than half the calls per home at the beach than for homes in the rest of the county. Further, the beach tourist area is family-oriented, and the nature of the public safety demand is less severe. The call data shows only 7 arrests in the tourist area all year, while the rest of the county required more than 400 arrests to keep the peace.
We certainly would not need the fire department we have or the police department we had if it was just another town like it is over here.
That's right. If residential, you'd need a lot more. But the board never checked. The coalition points out that the tourism industry generates additional tax revenues that do qualify for general purpose use. The county's share of sales tax just on rentals amounts to more than $4 million a year. Sales tax on tourist restaurant and retail spending and the increased property values of homes in the tourist area combine to generate almost 2/3 of county general purpose tax revenues. Audit reports confirm this.
If I can, on occupancy tax legality, Mr. Scanlon, is the county audited every year on their use of occupancy tax?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. When was the last time we had a notice of any violation or something we were doing illegally?
To my knowledge, never.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon.
Mr. Scanlon keeps his head down because he knows that verifying the legality of all the different types of spending that the county does is not the auditor's job. The auditor confirms that the county followed generally accepted accounting principles. The auditor obtained reasonable assurance that the county's financial statements are free from material misstatement. The audit reports do show 3 uses of occupancy tax. The 2 categories authorized by law, tourism promotion and tourism-related expenses, and a 3rd, transfers to other funds for other uses. That over the past decade, the county transferred more money into their general funds than they spent in either of the 2 defined categories of legal spending for occupancy tax. The Magellan Strategy Group's reports on OT laws can help us understand a possible ulterior motive. Although Currituck's TRE requirements are common to over 130 other tourism authorities, Currituck is the only authority without tourism industry representation. In fact, all others have at least a majority from the tourism industry. In North Carolina, counties are required to have a balanced budget. Evidence shows the commissioners understood that if not funded by OT, these general services would require a politically sensitive property tax increase. Currituck County exceeded its authority to use occupancy tax proceeds to fund general government services.